Gosh, it has been way too long, my friends, but I'm excited to say that Jon Anik is back here on the MMA Fighting channel ahead of UFC 321, which goes down Saturday in Abu Dhabi. Two big title fights and more. And as we found out, he will be calling the action with Daniel Cormier and the great Laura Sanko. Jon Anik, good to have you back. How are you?
Good to see you, buddy. It has been a long time. Usually we collect ourselves 10 to 12 times a year, but I feel like I haven't seen you other than on Instagram or on social media, I guess, in a couple months.
Yeah, you're a very busy guy. And look, I want to talk about this. And I know there's only a small group of people who will enjoy this. And there will be a big group of people who say, stop talking about this stuff. Let's talk about fighting. But the Red Sox made the playoffs. They outkicked their coverage. The Patriots are in first place in the AFC East as we speak. The Bruins are 3-1. And the Celtics are getting ready for a year that, let's be honest, could be a little tough to watch, but I'm still positive about it. Are we back, Jon? I feel like Boston sports are more back than they have been in quite some time.
It's an exciting time to be sure, and there will be no banging on the Boston Celtics. Joe Mazzulla is a good friend, and I know you weren't banging on them, but I'm going to go see them in Brooklyn, New York on November 18th. But don't be surprised if they exceed expectations. And they're going to play hard, right? Regardless of injury, regardless of roster depth. And I think that's going to result in them probably coming close to winning 50 games, whether people like it or not. As far as the Patriots are concerned, bro, for the rest of the NFL, it's got to be tough when they look at Drake May, because I feel like one of the most specialized jobs in the world with respect to astronautical science and everything else is NFL quarterback, which is to say there are 10 to 12 human beings in the world that we would classify as great or borderline elite at that particular job. Nobody can do it, and the Patriots have their quarterback of the future, Drake May. Let's go. So, yeah, Drake May is the lead story today. Sorry to everybody at MMAfighting.com.
Sorry. Yeah, I agree. And Joe Mazzulla is the man. The fact that the media was getting ready to play a fun basketball game and Missoula's like, nah, you're playing us and the coaches, and they just beat the bag out of them. It was very, very funny. And it just shows me that Joe Mazzulla is in the right headspace to run this team. But before we get into UFC 321, a couple things I want to ask you about before we get into all the festivities in Abu Dhabi. First, I got to say, incredible job on the Canelo Crawford card, because we haven't had a chance to speak since then, but what a performance by Terrence Crawford. By the time we got to that fight, it felt very big. It felt like we were watching something special as the fight was going on. What was that night like for you? And what was it like watching that performance from Bud Crawford in your return to the boxing commentary booth?
Well, professionally, it was incredible. I think people maybe would want to hear more, though, about Terrence Bud Crawford. And it seemed to me, as a man who contractually can't bet on mixed martial arts nor boxing, that by the time fight night rolled around, all the talking heads, all the experts, all of Terrence Crawford's contemporaries were picking him to win the fight, despite the fact that he held as a betting underdog, because seemingly he was the smaller man, which in a lot of respects he really was not. So it was a masterclass by him in a career full of masterclasses. And, I'm no boxing historian. I mean, I had to really condense my preparation in terms of watching the entire Bud Crawford catalog in a span of 3 weeks or so. But it's really nice to see him hit that rarefied air and be discussed in sort of glorified terms, because there was a huge legacy swing, I think, on this fight. And maybe there shouldn't have been for Canelo Alvarez, who, I think is feeling that legacy swing probably a little bit based upon this result. But it was a spectacle. We don't do a lot of stadium shows in the UFC, so it was great to be in the building and to be a part of it. And I think you know me well enough to know that I was just trying to stay in my lane and contribute my energy and my flair whenever I can. And, I appreciate the kind words off the top. But for me, it's sort of on to UFC 320 as it was a few weeks later. I'm just trying to knock down the cone in front of me. Honestly, whatever is the show in front of me, I'm just trying to attack. And, that's why we're going through UFC 321 fighter cards, not now, but right now.
I assume we'll see you back in the boxing booth in 2026. That'll be a cone down the road, but the final pay-per-view maybe ever for the UFC, at least as we know it, is set for December 6th in Las Vegas. And Merab Dvalishvili coming right back after that win over Corey Sandhagen at UFC 320, and he's going to fight Petr Yan again. This guy is just a demon, man. And I'm officially now, Jon, hope you're proud of me, I'm officially on the Merab as the Bantamweight GOAT train. And now he's looking to make history with the potential fourth title defense in a year. This is insane, Jon. Just absolutely insane.
Forget the bantamweight greatest of all time conversation. I don't know if I was the first to open up the Mount Rushmore debate, and I think Aljamain Sterling followed suit. But just go to Merab Dvalishvili's Tapology or Wikipedia page and start the fucking exercise there. I don't have to tell you, Michael Heck, right? This guy has accomplished so much, and as a champion in a relatively short amount of time, I don't have to tell you what is in front of him in terms of trying to become the first UFC champion in history to successfully defend the belt 4 times in a calendar year. Holy shit, right? Dominic Cruz talks about his 2016 fighting TJ Dillashaw in January, Uriah Faber in June, and Cody Garbrandt in December. And it was biting off more than he could chew, even though Dom was highly competitive in that third fight against Cody Garbrandt. All of this is to say that Merab Dvalishvili is just a different breed. He is human, right? I mean, he's the most drug-tested athlete this year, right? He's just a hard-working human, but I just think that in terms of getting through whatever mental barrier there might be in combat sports or in professional sports, right? You want to talk about a guy who operates as his own like mental sports psychologist, bro. He is on just another level, and I'm curious to see what Petr Yan, who a lot of us feel is an amazing former champion, can do with this opportunity. But my goodness, man, what a daunting task preparing for Merab Dvalishvili on whatever notice.
Yeah, I think you and I are in the same boat when we talk about the importance of title defenses and what that means in these overall debates. And obviously, we've had some incredible years from fighters over time. Heck, we just had one from Alex Pereira just last year. But if Merab wins again and he beats a very good fighter in Petr Yan, who appears to be healthy as a horse, a little less than 2 months away, is this the greatest year for a fighter in UFC history if he does this?
It'd be hard to argue otherwise. I mean, we've seen a lot of greatness, even years in which maybe John Jones defended the belt 2 times. When you look at the strength of schedule, you can argue it as a great year. Demetrius Johnson had some very active great years. But yeah, I mean, in this modernist of modern eras, right, I think this would go down as the greatest year of all time. And even just sort of biting that off and attempting that is really miraculous. And yeah, I mean, the checks cash, that's obviously a big part of this. And health is wealth, and Merab is healthy, and he came out of his last fight unscathed. And you never know when sort of an injury could intervene. I think if any champion in UFC history would fight on a torn ACL or fight with a torn labrum in his shoulder and be able to battle through that mentally, it's Merab Dvalishvili. But he's healthy, he's ready to go, and what a credit to the sport. And I said going into his last title defense against Corey Sandhagen that I felt as though he was the biggest American superstar in mixed martial arts right now. And I think that's open to debate. But this man has undeniable traction in the United States, and it's not just because he lives here.
Yeah, he's been getting over big over the past couple of years. He's way over now. He was such a fan favorite at UFC 320. And this has just been 2025 has been a wild year in general with big news and TV deals and the White House card becoming UFC 300 Part 2 and obviously big performances in the octagon. And what's funny is we're just days away from UFC 321. This news feels like it was 5 years ago at this point that Tom Aspinall is no longer an interim champ. He's undisputed. And this Saturday in the main event of UFC 321, he's going to defend that title for the first time against the former interim champ, Ciryl Gane. And I read a tweet from you a couple of days ago as we record saying that this fight, and I think you were referring to Aspinall, is, quote, let me pull this up, one of the biggest pressure spots in UFC history. And look, we've seen some big pressure spots over the last few years. We've talked about Bilal Muhammad fighting for the welterweight title. What a pressure spot that was for him. But can you expound on that? Why do you put this in the big, huge pressure spot here for Aspinall?
Well, forget any pressure put upon him by his dear friend and my friend and broadcast partner, Michael Bisping, being suggested that Tom Aspinall is going to not only go down as the greatest British mixed martial arts athlete of all time, but truly one of the all-time greats. But his fan base has swelled exponentially because of the whole John Jones circus / exercise, right? Ciryl Gane has gotten a lot of opportunities. He's a credentialed heavyweight. He's an outstanding striker. Seemingly, there has been an appetite for improvement in the wrestling and grappling areas. But, Tom Aspinall is anointed. He we went back, Kenny Florian and I did, for UFC Fight Pass this week and watched some of the early film. And even then, you can just see shades of greatness. So I think there's always been pressure on Tom. But because he didn't get the Jon Jones fight, and because he's now the undisputed UFC heavyweight champion, never mind the fact that he's a 4-1 favorite, in this crazy sport, could you imagine if in a couple Mondays we're all doing our podcasts and shows and talking about Tom Aspinall not holding serve as the favorite? It would be crazy, I think, in any other sport, right? 4-1 favorites don't lose very often in sports. So, yeah, there's a lot of pressure on Tommy, and I know he eats it like a fucking sandwich, but do you disagree? I mean, my gosh, man, there have been a ton of pressure spots, right? Khabib and Conor both in their rivalry, of course, and I think back to like the pressure Dustin was facing in the second Conor McGregor fight. I mean, there are a ton of pressure spots, right? You know, Dustin Poirier could not afford to lose that second fight to Conor McGregor, but Tom Aspinall cannot afford to lose at UFC 321, to quote the great Renato Moicano. Am I wrong?
I think you're right, because I mean, and it checks off all the boxes for that situation, because when fighters lose, especially in a position like Tom, let alone the Jon Jones debacle, there's short-term damage that comes with that, just from the fan base just blasting you, and you have to hear critics, so to speak, on these podcasts talk about what happened and why you lost, and maybe you weren't as good as everybody thought you were. And now you have this situation where he went through the Jon situation, and heavyweight is not like the greatest division right now, and he's in such an interesting spot where, with a bunch of title defenses, he could sort of rebuild this division in the way that he wants to. Maybe some fans do too. And then on the flip side, like and I'll say this from my perspective, Ciryl Gane, to me, there are very few people who thought he won his last fight. So he's in such a weird position right now. And Volkov's fighting on the same card against Jailton Almeida. But I didn't even, if they went with Derek Lewis after Derek Lewis got his last win, and I was screaming at the top of my lungs, like, just do Derek Lewis. Like, it's just fun. It gets Aspinall in there, and then we could start just getting Tom in as much as possible.
Yeah.
So I do agree with you there. And there's also, on the flip side, pressure on Ciryl Gane, right? I mean, like you mentioned, he's had multiple opportunities to fight for the undisputed title. Even Dana White was saying, yeah, Ciryl didn't win his last fight. So where do you gauge the pressure meter on the flip side for Ciryl Gane as well?
So I'm not really here for fun at this point, and neither is Tom Aspinall, right? With respect to the Black Beast, Derek Lewis, right? If this was the Anik Fighting Championships, I probably would have given the opportunity to Alexander Volkov, however rare an occurrence that might have been, to give a guy off a loss a title shot based upon everything that Alexander Volkov has accomplished in his career and his performance in that fight and the winning streak going into the Ciryl Gane fight. I wouldn't have been surprised to see promotionally if the UFC had gone in that direction, you know. But it's Ciryl Gane's opportunity, and I wouldn't be surprised to see him be competitive and do something with it. But my gosh, man, Tom Aspinall's fought 60 seconds in the last 2 years. And, you know, that came on the heels of a 1-year setback because of the injury in the Curtis Blades fight. So he's fought 1 minute against Curtis Blades over the last 2 years. He dealt with the whole Jon Jones saga, a lot of sweat equity in the gym. And it does come back a little bit to the health as well thing, right? Tom is healthy. Let's go. I can't wait to get to Abu Dhabi, you know, but my goodness, man, it's, you know, Tom Aspinall is going to have financial freedom, right? He is already the undisputed UFC heavyweight champion, but I think as far as he is concerned, he doesn't have that inner peace. You know, he wants to go down as the greatest of all time. And that initiative starts in earnest October 25th in United Arab Emirates.
So you say, hey, we're not in like the fun zone right now. And I definitely see that perspective. And if Aspinall wins, and like you said, he's nearly a minus 500 favorite to do so, how do we move forward here? Because the UFC has something here. There's no doubt about it. Tom is getting more popular by the day. Jon Jones is out of the picture. That fight is never happening. And that's fine. I've accepted that. I've accepted that for a really long time. And we mentioned Volkov's fighting Jailton Almeida. So maybe it lines up date-wise, depending on how that all plays out. But if you're the UFC and the matchmaking team, is this a situation where from here it just says, hey, we got to get this guy over towards greatness. We got to line up defenses. He's been out of the limelight for a while. He hasn't been that active. Is this line him up kind of situation, or is this an opportunity, Jon Anik, even in this heavyweight division, which is not very deep? Can we actually get a division that goes back to a meritocratic world heading into 2026 and Tom's just fighting the next dude up every single time?
Yeah, I mean, the question is, how often is the UFC's Undisputed Heavyweight Championship going to be on the line? Because over the last half decade, it hasn't been on the line all that often. And I could harken back to DC versus Miocic 3 at the UFC Apex and all sorts of different circumstances surrounding maybe why this belt hasn't been on the line all that often. You know, I don't expect Tom Aspinall to take a Merab Dvalishvili type of approach to his championship reign necessarily. But yeah, I mean, the winner of Volkov Almeida, first quarter 2026, I think that makes a shit ton of sense as opposed to holding Tom out for the White House card. You know, maybe in theory, if this is title defense number one, you get Tom's third title defense at the White House because maybe that is of interest. I think Jailton Almeida, stylistically, could factor prominently in this equation. You know, I know Drago Alexander Volkov did fight Tom previously, but I believe Volkov has improved quite a bit since then, so I think that fight might play out differently. But yeah, I mean, I do think that the division doesn't have 5 to 6 obvious number one contender types, and if you're trying to not live in the fun zone, then it's incumbent upon the UFC to continue to develop this heavyweight division before Gable Stevenson comes calling.
How bad is a loss here for Tom? Like we sort of touched on it a little bit, and as I was kind of going through the scenarios in my brain, I haven't been able to actually get there. And even you just saying like, hey, the Monday after UFC 321, we could realistically there is a world where we could go on our shows and be like, yeah, Tom Aspinall just lost the heavyweight title to Ciryl Gane.
Yeah.
How bad is this?
Well, so I'm an MMA fan, and I think in our conversation that comes across, right? Like if you don't think over last week at some point I've called my twin brother, whom I talk to 8 times a day, and said, dude, could you imagine if Tom Aspinall fucking loses? Like, you're crazy. Of course that conversation has happened. I'm just a fan at my core. It would be insane. But anything can happen in mixed martial arts, and Ciryl Gane is more than anything. You know, he has more than a puncher's chance. But it would be crazy to walk into that world. But in terms of how it would affect Tom, what are the goals here, right? Because he is going to realize financial freedom, right? This man is going to make a ton of money. Even if he, quote unquote, slips on a banana peel at UFC 321, I would expect him to go back and become the undisputed heavyweight champion again. I think he's that good. You know, I'm much more aligned with Michael Bisping than not in terms of how great Tom Aspinall can be. That's why there's a lot of pressure, you know, a lot of pressure to hold serve here. And, you know, I think he has a great chance to do just that. We'll see.
Co-main event, the vacant Strawweight title is on the line. Zhang Weili is moving up to challenge Valentina Shevchenko, and I cannot wait for that fight. But now we got Virna Jandiroba finally getting her day in court, John. She faces Mackenzie Dern, and this is a rematch. And obviously their first fight was very, very fun, but both have improved dramatically. I mean, they are completely different fighters from that first one. And for those who have bet on the Mackenzie Dern is going to be UFC champion train and haven't jumped off just yet, here she is getting her first crack at a UFC world title. So thoughts on the fight, and who do you think needs this one more? Is it Mackenzie Dern because of the years and years, or is it Virna, who's really just had to scratch and claw and pick up wins, and finally she's getting her opportunity?
It's a good question, but it's really hard to say who needs it more, right? I don't think Virna Jandiroba necessarily is going to get a second opportunity at the world title, right? She had to work hard to accrue these wins and this winning streak to put herself in position and to sort of make herself undeniable, excuse me, once Zhang Weili left the division. So as we sit here a few days out, Mackenzie Dern is the betting favorite to become the undisputed UFC strawweight champion. And good for her, because she has worked just as hard as Virna, I think, in a lot of respects. You know, their first fight had a lot of different components to it. It was fought in a global pandemic. Somebody tell Virna Jandiroba that for the rematch, she should not wear knee pads. Yeah, it's my favorite name to say. We play the audio file on the Anik and Florian podcast all the time. Virna Jandiroba. Kakara is a bird from the falcon family. I've been trying to get Joe Rogan to get a falcon ear on the Joe Rogan Experience for years. Anyway, Virna Jandiroba is much more a different beast now than I think she was then. Mackenzie Dern has improved leaps and bounds as well. But in terms of championship medal, Virna Jandiroba is in her fighting prime. She's really come into her own. I requested a fighter meeting with her in advance of her last fight and emerged out of that one with flying colors. I think she needs it more, to answer your question directly. But opportunity knocks for both of these women, and you've heard me say repeatedly, probably on your airwaves, that the greatest part of this job for me is when a non-UFC champion breaks through and becomes a champion for the first time. And so I can see the positive in all of this. And I'm just really excited to see one of those women brought to tears when they get belted by Dana White.
Yeah, it's sort of the fight we all sort of saw coming after Zhang beat Tatiana Suarez. She wanted to move up. Now she gets her opportunity. And the main card's going to be really fun. Like, not the sort of the bottom of the main card is not like the sexiest names, but those who really watch the sport and pay attention and know what's happening. Like, these are going to be fun fights. The stakes are high in a lot of them as well. But I think the one that's gotten the most attention outside of the two title fights, especially with Merab fighting UFC 320 and now fighting again at 323, Umar Nurmagomedov is back for the first time since the loss to Merab in January, taking on the surging Mario Bautista, coming off the win over Patchy Mix. This fight is great. I mean, this is perfect matchmaking. This is the fight that needed to happen. This is so big at 135 right now, is it not, John? This is such an interesting matchup on paper.
So do you remember March 2nd of 2024 when Umar Nurmagomedov fought Beksat Almakhan on short notice, right? And had that sort of flash knockdown early. Sort of just speaks to Billy Joel's great song, Pressure, right? And sort of thematically something that we've touched on during this interview today, right? There's always pressure. And even though Almakhan was lesser known at that point in time, you know, Umar is probably in the same price range, minus 455 against Mario Bautista, who's won 8 fights in a row in the UFC's Bantamweight division. So a lot of pressure on Umar, of course. Certainly gave Merab Dvalishvili his toughest fight, dating to Ricky Simone in the early days. And I am fascinated by this fight, as I'm sure you are, just to see what Super Mario can do with the opportunity, to see how Umar responds 9 to 10 months later after his fight with Merab. It's a great fight. The division's never been in a better place. And, you know, as you see some of these other bantamweights fighting, Ayman Zahabi and others sort of putting over the champion, right? What an amazing time to be a top flight bantamweight contender, right? Look at all these guys getting opportunities, right? Umar getting a title crack on his timeline and not Merab's, right? O'Malley getting his rematch. Sandhagen finally getting his title fight. Petr Yan is getting his rematch. Bodes well for a lot of these bantamweights, especially a guy like Umar, who gave Merab his best fight. But yeah, man, I mean, that's obviously the fight that jumps off the card for a lot of people, and rightfully so. Let's see what Super Mario can do with all of this. He is plus 350 right now.
I just looking at it through sort of the Mario Bautista lens. If he beats Umar, like, enough, you can't say anything else about it, right? Like, beating Patchy Mix, especially after what we saw in Patchy's most recent fight at UFC 320, like, that win didn't age terrifically. You know what I mean? Because you know how the fan base kind of looks at it, like, oh, he's the Bellator guy, so there's levels to this and all of that. And Mario, I mean, goes out and beats Umar, man. Like, he gets the credit. That now you can't say anything else, and that's kind of a really interesting spot we could see him in, right?
Yeah, I mean, life oftentimes is about timing. And I think even though a lot of fans took issue with Mario Bautista's win over Jose Aldo, at that point in time, I think he was worthy of a championship opportunity. And if he wins at UFC 321, he would have stacked 2 more high-level wins on top of that. But you and I talk a lot about sort of undeniability. He's undeniable, right? If Lerone Murphy is not undeniable after what he did against Aaron Pico, then there is no such thing as somebody who is in a title eliminator, does everything possible, and becomes undeniable. It doesn't exist, right? When Yair Rodriguez beats Patricio Pitbull, he turns to Hunter Campbell and he says, hey, man, you promised me a title fight, right? So not surprisingly, he doesn't turn around and accept the fight against Diego Lopez. Diego Lopez goes and does that to John Silva. Is he not worthy of a championship opportunity? So yeah, dude, like if Bautista wins 9 in a row, of course. But I think the thing working best for him, and let's not forget that Alexander Volkov tried to put over Movsar Evloev and sort of lay out a red carpet for him to get the opportunity to fight him for the belt, and it didn't happen. But I think what's working for Mario Bautista is the champion, Merab Dvalishvili, who will probably call his name and want to fight him in like a week and a half.
Yeah, I mean, I talked to Merab before the second O'Malley fight, before the Umar fight, and even then he said that Mario Bautista deserved a title fight over Umar at the time. So yeah, Merab will put him over in a big way, and that's a great spot for Mario. And UFC 321 is going to be a lot of fun. I love daytime MMA, but from there we go to the Apex for some back to backs, and then we're at MSG for a damn good one, headlined by JDM and Islam Makhachev, and then we head to Qatar. What a twofer for that card with Arman Sarukian and Dan Hooker and Bilal Muhammad versus Ian Machado Gary. And then it's 323 and then the Royval versus Cap card at the Apex. But then, John, the ESPN deal comes to a close and off to Paramount we go with the UFC. What are your thoughts right now on that? Couple months left in this relationship with ESPN, hopping over to Paramount. What are you thinking about in regards to that 2.5 months away from that reality?
So I have no choice really with respect to my contract status then but to knock down the cone in front of me. Now, certainly it's going to be weird to have to stop saying live on pay-per-view, and we never take your viewership for granted. We're ready to go live on pay-per-view, right? I'm going to exhaustively say those words over the next several months. It can still be Dateline Las Vegas. This is UFC 327, but it's going to be an adjustment. And yeah, I am excited to see how it all plays out. I think that one thing that our live production team has tried to humbly show the world is that we can effectively make these transitions as we did from Fox to ESPN, and now we'll do from ESPN to CBS and Paramount Plus. But show must go on. And that's sort of the initiative. I couldn't tell you where we're going in January. The news actually could be out there. I couldn't tell you where we're going. I'm just sort of focused on the pay-per-views in front of me, and then we'll bury that pay-per-view hatchet and work into January. But I'm excited. I like change in general as a human being. I think it's exciting. I have moved from Massachusetts to Connecticut to Las Vegas to Florida, and now I'm back in Connecticut. I don't like to idle, so I'm sad for some of my former ESPN colleagues who might be on the outside looking in, but it's an exciting time for everybody in the UFC and MMA world, and thankful to have a front row seat as always.
Are you enjoying the UFC White House talk at this point? I can't lie to you, John, and I'm not expecting you to say the same thing I am, but I'm not over it, but I'm kind of over it because ever since this idea came to be, it just became sort of what Fight Island could have been, and then it became like what UFC 300 could have been, and now it's just sort of nonstop chatter about it. And I'm at the point now where it's just like, I want to know who's fighting on it so we could stop speculating. And that's just me, just because I'm in this news cycle and I talk to people, and every conversation I have, the White House thing comes up. So what have you made of all this ever since Donald Trump said right before 4th of July of 2025, we're going to do a UFC event at the White House. Now it seems we have a date. We have renderings of what it's going to look like. We have ideas of what it could all be. Have you been enjoying this ride at this point? Or are you just like incredibly thinking about what this could all be? I mean, because you're going to be there. You're obviously going to be there and calling it. It's going to be ridiculous come the date. But how have you been enjoying this sort of roller coaster ride of the idea of what UFC White House actually can be?
It's hard not to think about my friends, the matchmakers, Sean Shelby and Mick Maynard, and how they're sort of wrapping their heads around potentially holding out some superstars to try to have them fight June 14th at the White House, or to have the calendar aligned so that they can maybe make a title defense first quarter early on, and then it would line up. UFC 300 was compared to UFC 299, right? And I think the point of this White House show is for there to be no comp. The greatest broadcasting experience of my lifetime with respect to Canelo versus Crawford and Khabib versus Conor was Sphere. And that was a love letter to Mexico, right? If it was going to be one of one, Sphere should have been headlined by Khamzat Chimaev. You knew which name I was going to say. If Sphere indeed was going to be one of one with respect to thematically the Mexico thing, right? Sphere should have been a UFC 300 White House type event headlined by that animal, Khamzat Chimaev, right? So as I look ahead to this show, it's fun podcast fodder for sure during a light week or a bye week. It's fun to get speculative, but the MMA news cycle is such that we had new news after UFC 320. Namely, our newly minted undisputed UFC light heavyweight champion says he wants to move up to heavyweight and not fight until June 14th. So this is truly one of one, I mean, this is the president of the United States and Dana White sort of, pulling their Johnsons out and saying, look what we can do. This is going to be the most amazing spectacle in the history of professional live sports in many respects. An unforgettable show. And my goodness, how many superstars can they actually get on June 14th? It's going to be exciting to find out.
Last thing I want to ask you about is Dana White did a little post-fight scrum after Contender Series on Tuesday as we record, and he was asked about Ilia Topuria and what that's going to look like in January. And Dana, as you would expect him to say, was, well, it's a possibility, but nothing is done. I don't make fights after fights, etc. Putting the matchmaking hat on, and you're with me. We've been on this road for a long time. Lightweight is the best division in sports, one of the toughest divisions in all of sports. And I had a fun conversation the other day with Dustin Poirier and Bruce Buffer at the same time. And we were talking about how to matchmake the top of this division, because right now we get Arman fighting Dan, as we mentioned, but Ilia seems to be the name everybody's looking to sort of fill in that blank. Like, is it going to be Patty? Is it going to be Gaethje? Is it Arman if he beats Dan Hooker? Could we have a situation where he has to turn right back around? Obviously, we need Max Holloway versus Oliveira for the BMF title. And if we don't get that, I will lose my mind. But Topuria versus blank, maybe January, maybe February, who knows? How would you do it? How would you match make the top two fights at lightweight right now?
So because Arman Tsarukyan wasn't able to make the walk against Islam Makhachev, he has put himself in a position where he has lost some choice in certain matters. And he has responded by weighing in as the backup by taking this main event in Qatar. If you are Justin Gaethje or Paddy Pimblett, you better hope that Arman Tsarukyan doesn't steamroll through Dan Hooker, right? Because that, I think, would make him undeniable, so to speak, right? And I think he would be more than willing to turn around quickly. And I think from a competitive standpoint, a lot of fans would love to see Topuria versus Tsarukyan just the way they would have loved to have seen a rematch between Islam Makhachev and Arman Tsarukyan. I would disagree with our good friend Dustin Poirier and others who would suggest in a straight meritocracy that Paddy Pimblett isn't deserving. I understand his resume maybe doesn't stack up to Arman's or Justin's in totality, but the winning streak is the winning streak. If you're only as good as your last performance, he was absolutely outstanding. So I don't have any issue with Paddy Pimblett getting a title fight. Gaethje obviously is in the mix. I can understand why he has drawn a line in the sand, but I think I'm really looking at Qatar, which is now about a month away. And if Tsarukyan does something spectacular, perhaps the waiting game will have worked to his advantage.
Yeah, Patty's the bigger fight, no doubt about it. Gaethje's exciting. Like, you see those two dudes on a poster, even though you probably think the betting odds are going to be highly favoring Ilia Topuria in that fight. It's a great story. Gaethje's last chance might be his last fight ever. Fighting for an undisputed belt. Like, there's story there, and that makes it interesting. And there's no way that fight is bad or boring in any way. Tsarukyan, to me, is still the more interesting fight, but I understand the position he's in as well. So I don't think you can really go wrong here. But if they go with Patty, I kind of think you have to do it. Like, why risk it? Why risk throwing Patty in there with an Arman? Or if they don't go with Patty, like, who does Patty fight?
But see, Patty doesn't care. Yeah. He'll fight any one of these guys, but none of them seemingly will sign on the dotted line. That's the thing. Like, Paddy Pimblett has been a realist when it comes to his championship trajectory and aspirations in our fighter meeting. Give me Charles Oliveira, like, he knew that he was going to have to get through one more scalp, but you got to have that guy who's willing to fight him. And I'm not sure that there is necessarily that top contender that wants to fight him right now. And you can make a case for and against all of these guys, right? The case against Tsarukyan is that he maybe forfeited the opportunity by not being able to get on the scale at UFC 311. I guess the case against Justin Gaethje would be that maybe he's 1-1 in his last two. The case against Paddy Pimblett, maybe strength of schedule, right? But Paddy Pimblett's got the long winning streak, the undefeated guy in the UFC, not to mention checking every sort of extracurricular box. So, I could sit and make a case for any of these guys as a promoter or as their manager. But yeah, and let's not discount Islam Makhachev in all of this, because I know we got to go. But like, the craziest fact as we sit here mid-October right now is that Islam Makhachev is not a UFC champion, having never lost a belt, right? So What I guess the fan in me would like to see as a guy who has Islam Makhachev as the number 1 pound for pound fighter in the world, he goes out and maybe beats Jack Della Maddalena and says, all right, Ilia Topuria, I'll see you at 155 pounds in February.
Right, you think he'd go back down?
Yeah.
He's huge. He's giant.
He's a lot mentally tougher than I
am. that is very, very true. Have you seen him lately? He looks humongous. He looks like he's pushing 200 right now.
I just, it's just so weird how it all played out for Islam,
Right?
But yeah, it's, I can't wait to sit down with those guys, with Jack and Islam, in advance of 322. But we got big things in Abu Dhabi. You wanted to wheels up to Yaz Island here in a few days. You know how it goes.
Yeah. One cone at a time, one event at a time, John, the Bill Belichickian way, before the North Carolina thing anyway. So thank you very much as always for the time, my man. I appreciate you. Make sure you check out the Anik and Florian podcast. Always a great time with John and Kenny and Ray Longo. You never know who's going to come through there for some great conversation about the wonderful world of mixed martial arts. John, appreciate you. Safe travels to Abu Dhabi, and hopefully we can catch up before 2026 in the Paramount Experience.
Thank you, buddy. Anytime.